Good afternoon. It's Friday the 7th of February 2025, just after 1 o'clock, and welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio is Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
And by video link, we have Mark Anderson. So we are going to begin with more following on from Wednesday and Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. What do we say about that?
Well, just some more information has surfaced on this, Mike. It's getting more interesting, but we'll put this lead image up on screen here. What we're calling this is the latest timeshare scam in Gaza. There's Trump getting it ready here. Where did this idea come from? That's the big question. We'll get to some answers to that in a second. Like, who dreamt this up? Was this something that Trump dreamt up, or was it given to him by Netanyahu, or did it come from somewhere else? We think we know the answer to this, and we'll share that with you in short order. But the backlash from this, Mike, has been unbelievable. Internationally, we'll talk about that as well. Also domestically, but even in Israel, there's even backlash from some of the hardcore Zionist camps. They don't like certain aspects of this. They don't like the fact that the United States was going to come and occupy their land in Gaza. This is how some Israelis who view Gaza as their land, they're not happy about this at all, Mike. So this is very interesting how Trump, through his Bolshevik style, as usual, has basically wiggled everything loose, and everything is completely up in the air at the moment.
Yes, indeed. Mark, it'd be very interesting to get your thoughts on this. And the question is whether Trump is beginning to backtrack, maybe?
Perhaps so. It's a very audacious proposal, of course, to say the U.S. would elbow its way in there. And I think it's not surprising in one sense. The U.S. is more or less the Roman Empire of the modern times. Wherever its military touches, wherever its power goes, that is its domain. And so it could be, on the one hand, a buffer to keep the IDF from doing the very worst anymore in Gaza. The U.S. would be part of a new two-state solution, right? The U.S. and Israel would be the two-state solution rather than Israel and Palestine. But at the same time, where would the United States get the authority, despite its Romanesque, Caesaresque kind of behavior? It really doesn't have the authority to just simply move in there and literally take ownership. But again, Trump tends to kind of overextend himself for strategic and leverage reasons, and then he ends up kind of backing off a little bit. Will he actually do this is the big question.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I think it's just absolute nonsense. I mean, what he said is one of the most ridiculous things that Trump's ever done in public, and that's saying a lot. He has said some crazy things over the years, but this is just totally divorced from reality. And, you know, you have to assume that he or Netanyahu are negotiating in good faith. That would be your first mistake, because clearly they're not, if you look at what's happened over the last 15 months. The other thing is, as usual, Trump slipped and said, oh, the king in Jordan and the general in Egypt, if they're going to make some land available, that means that they want to turf the Palestinians out, with U.S. troops at gunpoint, Trail of Tears, just like the Cherokees marched to Oklahoma. I mean, this isn't going to happen. So I don't see anything realistic in all of this. I agree with what Mark said. It's a ham-fisted way of creating leverage. But the international backlash and the fact that it's exposed the ethnic cleansing agenda now, like there's no hiding it. It's literally Trump, the property developer. So anyway.
Well, let's look at whether they're pulling back a little bit from the position. Here is the lovely Catherine.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region.
And the thing about it is, he's not talking about paying for the redevelopment of Gaza. He's also not talking about paying for whatever it is he's proposing that all the Palestinians go to live in. He's just basically proposed dump them in the middle of the desert somewhere and leave them to it.
But when he was with Netanyahu, he said that we're going to build it and we're going to have long-term ownership. The U.S. is going to have a long-term ownership position. So that's all 24 hours later. That's all being walked back. And it's an out-of-the-box idea because that's what President Trump is like. So actually, no, this is not an out-of-the-box idea. We did a little bit of digging, and it wasn't long before we found out where this idea came from. And it came from what I call the nepotistic nightmare that is Donald Trump's son-in-law, aka the president-in-law. I don't know anybody that voted for Jared Kushner, but somehow we've got a Jared Kushner administration. Watch this.
In Gaza's waterfront property, it could be very valuable to, if people would focus on kind of building up, livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up. But I don't think that Israel has stated that they don't want the people to move back there afterward. The thing that I would try to do if I was Israel right now is I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I would try to move people in there. I know that won't be the popular thing to do, but I think that that's a better option to do so that you can go in and finish the job.
That's the guy that's in charge. He's running point for Donald Trump's Israel-Palestine issue. That's the author of the Abraham Accords. That's not like nobody. It's not some random guy talking. That is literally Donald Trump's right hand. And he's just told you what the agenda is there.
Right.
So that's kind of like where this came from. And by the way, this has been confirmed by the Times of Israel that it was Jared Kushner who gave him the idea. And what happened, according to reports, Mike, is that Trump was briefed by a couple of people and he got a little bit confused before the Netanyahu press conference, and he just kind of synthesized it together like an omelet, Trump style, and it just kind of blurted out. And like everyone, the whole world is like trying to deal with the fallout.
Yeah. Okay. But in the meantime, if we bring the conversation a bit back to reality, Netanyahu presented Trump with something pretty dark, actually.
This is really something I don't know. So this is a golden pager. This is presented by Netanyahu to Donald Trump. It says, to President Donald J. Trump, our greatest friend and ally, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is a pager. He's making a joke about the pager attack allegedly against Hezbollah in Lebanon, which killed 37 people, injured and maimed thousands, including children and bystanders. And this is a stolen olive tree cross-section from Lebanon with a golden pager pressed with both hands. It's just a sick joke presented to the president here by a wanted war criminal with the ICC, Netanyahu. I mean, talk about bad taste, okay? This is so tone deaf. Now, is it worse that he's giving this gift, or is it worse that the president accepted it? And that's the conundrum you're in with Israel. It's like, you can be a billionaire, you can be the richest man in the world, but you can't buy class. And that's the problem with Netanyahu and the way things are going in this relationship.
Indeed. And but Mark, just to finish this segment off then, the issue of ISIS.
Yeah, let's put that up on the screen if you would, Mike, that slide. Trump at that press conference with Netanyahu, a joint press conference, referred to his first term, and he said that he and Bibi put together plans then that brought peace and stability to the Middle East, much more so than in many decades. And together, he and Bibi defeated ISIS, and that was referring to Trump's first term, and ended the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. He threw that in. But this December 9 headline from just last December from the Pentagon, Department of Defense mission to defeat ISIS remains ongoing in Syria. The Defense Department's mission to defeat ISIS remains ongoing in Syria, says in the subhead, Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh said today. And that was December 9th of just this last year. So ISIS still lives. The dragon still lives. They didn't slay the dragon. And I did a little reading up, and the October 7 alleged attack, at least alleged in the way they described it, that was the powder keg for the entire war on Gaza. There are some at least tenuous connections, even though they say it was mainly engineered by Hamas. There are some connections in the greater Islamic world of ISIS with that attack. At least there are claims of it. So there's a lot of irony there that not only did they not defeat ISIS, but ISIS may have had at least a secondary involvement in the events of October 7th. So there's a lot of misstatements going on that just don't ring true, that surround this whole issue.
You don't agree with that?
I would push back against that. I've seen those claims, and a lot of them originate from Israeli sources or kind of conservative U.S.
But what we can't
media.
say, on the other hand, is that U.S. money and arms have been funding and arming ISIS in Syria, for example, and other places.
ISIS tried to emerge in Gaza, and they got pushed out by Hamas and chased out, basically. They shut it down pretty quickly. You don't have Gaza is a pluralistic society with Orthodox Christians, Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Shiites, a mix of people, Druze as well.
Yeah.
So it's a pluralistic, multi-ethnic, multi-religious tapestry. It's always been that way. So, but the West are trying to portray it as radical Islam, and then trying to portray Hamas as a radical Islamist terrorist organization. But Hamas was founded by the Israelis themselves to create a counterbalance against the Yasser Arafat and the PLO,
Right.
funded by Israel, because they wanted to create a radical image of Gaza so that they could do what they're doing to it right now. And what happened was Hamas kind of grew out of control, even out of Israeli control, and it became something that they couldn't handle at some point. Sound familiar? Israel itself, when
Right.
the United States, Israel became something that we can't handle.
Yeah.
But I will say the other thing is there is no truth at all that the U.S. and Israel defeated ISIS. In fact, ISIS never attacked Israel. The one time it did, it apologized. Okay. Israel acted as ISIS's air force in Syria for years. The United States hit Syrian troops, hit Russian troops to defend ISIS positions. And the U.S. did not engage ISIS on the ground. ISIS was engaged by the Iranian Quds forces, the Iraqi Hashd al-Shabi, People's Mobilization Units, and Hezbollah. They defeated ISIS on the ground. I was in Iraq in the liberation of Iraq when they defeated ISIS in Iraq. Okay, so I can tell you I was there, and the U.S. did nothing. All the U.S. did was flatten Mosul and flatten Raqqa and kill about 20,000 civilians in the process, and very few ISIS fighters. The Russians, on the other hand, dealt a huge blow to ISIS in Syria. They were actually hitting targets, unlike the United States, who blew up quite a few empty buildings and killed a lot of civilians, and then basically backed off and declared victory. I mean, it's the biggest farce that the U.S. defeated ISIS. It's one of the biggest lies going, and they're still trading off it. And yet, as Mark pointed out, even though they claim they defeated ISIS, that's still the official reason why they're in Syria. So, I mean, the whole thing is a joke.
Okay, well, look, let's move on to Ukraine then and bring this up. This is from the Russian intelligence agencies through a media release. Let's do a quick translation of it. It says NATO members are preparing a campaign to discredit Zelenskyy. So this is the 3rd of February. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service published this press release stating that they, quotes, according to information received by the SVR, NATO headquarters is increasingly thinking about a change of power in Ukraine. They're saying that NATO at all costs wants to maintain what remains of Ukraine as an anti-Russian enclave, and they want to, quotes, freeze the conflict by bringing everyone to the table for what the Russians claim NATO is calling the beginning of a settlement. So Russia claims NATO views the only impediment to this scenario is Zelenskyy himself, and they say that NATO wants him gone. And they're saying in the run-up to the election campaign, NATO headquarters is preparing a large-scale operation to discredit Zelenskyy. One of the things they say that NATO will eventually release is Zelenskyy and his close associates have misappropriated $1.5 billion that was intended to be used to buy ammunition for the war. And the Russians are also saying that NATO will reveal that Zelenskyy and his crew will have withdrawn the salaries of 130,000 dead Ukrainian servicemen to foreign bank accounts by listing them as alive when in fact they were already dead. Now, around the same time that the Russians published that press release, Politico carried this article reporting that Russia was getting behind US calls for an election in Ukraine. So suddenly the US calling for elections in Ukraine, which seems to fit with what the Russians were saying in that press release. And this call was made by US Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, who said in most democracies, elections taking place even during wartime, I think it's important. I believe it's good for democracy. The beauty of a strong democracy is having more than one potential candidate. So Politico quotes voters as saying that Kellogg and other White House officials have floated the idea of pushing Ukraine to agree to elections as part of an initial truce with Russia. But Politico's also reporting that Ukraine currently can't hold legal elections because the constitution doesn't allow elections during wartime and while Ukraine is under martial law. And of course, Zelenskyy put martial law in place at the time the Russian special operation began. But even Zelensky's political rivals are apparently against the idea, at least according to the Kiev Post. And who do you think they quote? Well, no one other than Petro Poroshenko. So do you think he means it, Patrick?
Absolutely not. So what Petro Poroshenko is such a political animal. So to what he's doing is very clever. To the Ukrainian audience, he's saying basically, no, we don't want elections. Because if he says we want elections, the Azov battalions and the Nazi factions will absolutely flatten him, possibly even chase him out of the country or kill him. Okay. So to the international audience, Poroshenko is basically saying that we will not negotiate with the Russians, and there will be no peace until we recover all of our territory, including Crimea, 1991 borders. So he's talking to the British government and to Washington. So externally, he's putting himself out as a candidate for the election, a hardliner that is not going to take anything from the Russians. You see how clever Petro Poroshenko has turned into quite a skilled politician over the years.
In the meantime, in an effort, well, the question was it in an effort to shore up Zelenskyy or to discredit him? Well, Piers Morgan was deployed to interview him. Let's have a quick listen to this.
President, let me be clear. I do not personally believe that is the reason he invaded Ukraine. I think he just wanted to get his hands on Ukraine, and he didn't care how many people he killed to do it. But there is, as you know, what he tells his people is that he's doing this for the protection of the national security of Russia, that he couldn't have Ukraine joining NATO because that would present an existential threat to the security of the Russian people. I don't agree with that, and that's what he tells his people. And so I'm moving forward to when you're all sitting around a table and you're trying to negotiate your way to an end of the hot stage of the war. I just don't see any way he allows you, as part of that settlement, to become a full member of NATO. And that's why it's interesting to me that you're now outlining a potential plan B, if you like, which involves enough guarantees of security, particularly with the military, that you're able to deter him from attacking again. And I think is that a correct understanding of your position?
If NATO is not today, but in some time in the future, then all this process when we go to NATO, all this time when we are waiting, no matter how long it takes, and unfortunately does not depend on us. If this process is protracted for years or decades, not because of us, but because of partners, then we have absolutely just question what will be defending us against this evil for this whole time on this whole path. Which support package, which missiles, will we be given nuclear weapons? Then let them give us nuclear weapons.
So there you go. He's dying for nukes.
Listen, when I first saw that, I thought Piers Morgan has just scored the biggest own goal because he was humiliated by Tucker Carlson in the Riyadh interview that Tucker did with Piers Morgan. It was humiliating for Piers Morgan. I mean, he really exposed himself as the sort of shallow propagandist, the sort of Murdoch stooge, the warmonger, the completely cheap reality TV show personality. But now, looking at this, this, what Morgan did is he just destroyed any negotiated settlement opening talks by putting Zelenskyy out talking about nukes. I mean, if Russia needs a public reason to go all the way to Kiev, Zelenskyy just laid it out on a silver salver, and Morgan is the butler basically serving up the dish on that. So, but now I'm thinking, if he is a propaganda stooge for Rupert Murdoch, he's playing a role, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He's basically set up Zelenskyy, who everybody knows is a complete buffoon, who is a total egomaniac and a megalomaniac, who really is on borrowed time. Let's face it, a couple of months, Zelenskyy's on a jet to Switzerland or, London and Mayfair to hang out with Zelenskyy at Lancashire House or whatever, or off to Washington. He's gone. So all he can do here is give the Russians much more leverage in negotiations, which they've just got.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, the other big story from the States, at least, is the shutting down of US aid. Now, in a minute, we're going to look at the implications for quite a number of squealing British NGOs and charities and so on. But what have you got on this?
This is a seismic tremor that's happened here for whatever reason, and it could be for political reasons. USAID, we'll bring this up on screen. This is the U.S. International Agency for Aid and Development. They claimed to do, food aid and things like that, and certainly they do a bit of that, founded by John F. Kennedy in 1961. And really it was an influence during the Cold War area, influence operations run by USAID here. It's over for now, and this is what we'll try to explain to you. So it's not fully gone, but all the kind of crazy DEI, woke, international LGBT theatrical performances, all of that nested under a $40 billion per year budget at USAID. And that money gets spread around to a lot of places. The biggest recipient is actually under the banner of governance, the most amount of funding. Then you have pro-democracy activities under the civil society banner, and then also paying for and subsidizing foreign media, Mike. This is a big part of it. So if you look at places like Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, all of these places on the cusp either of NATO membership or Western versus Russian influence, they'll spend a lot more money there, plus anything in China's external orbit across the Middle East. You name it, they're there. South America, they're all over the world. So Romania, a lot of media activity there to make it pro-NATO. Same with Bulgaria, Ukraine, and so forth. They'll run defamation operations against Western journalists using Ukrainian cutouts funded by USAID. I was in one of those USAID funded hit lists of journalists. And so it's a good way to find out who's doing good independent media work.
Right.
You just go look at those hit lists. So that's what they've been doing. So they've taken a wrecking ball to this. And I think the initial impetus was Samantha Power was the head of USAID. We'll show her in a minute, but she was one of the progenitors of Russiagate. And a lot of the Russiagate stuff was laundered through USAID funded cutout operations, NGOs, media, plus the southern border issue was definitely tied into USAID. So those were the initial targets. But what they found was a lot more once they lifted up the hood and saw what was underneath this dirty engine of U.S. Power and influence. So here's Samantha Power here. I mean, she's the head of it. Here she's running for notice the Atlantic Council is, another one of these NGOs. They're hosting a forum here. This is Gay Pride Month, I guess. So it's what USAID is doing for Pride around the world. So they're really into funding all of these sort of progressive identity politics, trans, LGBT, and so forth, feminist stuff, and basically everything that the incoming Trump administration and J.D. Vance and everybody, Elon Musk wants to basically take a wrecking ball to. So that's Mrs. Cass Sunstein there. And we'll go on here. So Marco Rubio is now the appointed USAID acting administrator. So he's basically taken over. This is the Secretary of State. So what they've done here is interesting. They pulled USAID under the State Department for tighter management. They'll do culling. They'll keep the things they want. They'll get rid of the things they don't like. And they'll probably add new things. And some of this is also going to get farmed into the new CIA, the new Central Intelligence Agency. So, and that's where it was before Kennedy created USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy. All of this regime change, democracy promotion was done through, and influence in media was done through directly under the CIA's umbrella. Trump will also take, under the executive branch, direct control and management of some of these deep state, clandestine, or whatever you want to call them, influence operations. So that's just a little bit of it. There's probably a lot. It's much more complex than that. But what's interesting about Marco Rubio, who is now railing against USAID, he's also on the board of the International Republican Institute, which is funded by USAID to the tune of, some people are reporting, as much as 130 million in total. I'm not sure if that's annual funding. I think that's just aggregate. But Rubio, I don't know. I haven't checked the financials close enough to know if he is taking a second salary from the International Republican Institute, which is the right-wing version of the National Endowment for Democracy, which the Democrats tend to work through the NED to do their influence ops internationally. And the International Republican Institute, which was run mainly by John McCain while he was alive, they ran Saakashvili from Georgia through here. They've ran Salumi, the French president of Georgia recently. She's part of this organization as well. Rubio's on the board, as is Lindsey Graham and others. So, I mean, they're kind of involved in this as well, even though they're pretending to be attacking it, which I find very interesting.
So what about Chris Murphy?
Well, Chris Murphy, there's an interesting character. So he is railing against, he's a senator from Connecticut. He was on stage with John McCain before the Maidan, whipping up the neo-Nazi crowds in December in Kiev in 2014. That's Chris Murphy. So he's really upset about this. Now the Democrats are really pushing back. So he got very angry and got a crowd together in front of Capitol Hill. And here's what he said.
So, Elon Musk has been floating all sorts of awful, terrible conspiracy theories about what happens at USAID. Let's make it very clear that every single day, America is safer because of what happens at USAID. USAID fights terrorist groups all across this world, making sure that we address the underlying causes for a retreat to terrorism. USAID chases China all around the world, making sure that China doesn't monopolize contracts for critical minerals and port infrastructure all around the world. It supports freedom fighters everywhere in this world. Up until yesterday, delivering firewood, for instance, to the brave Ukrainian defenders on the Eastern Front.
So it funds freedom fighters all around the world. He's talking about the white helmets. He's talking about ISIS. He's talking about Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda, the Tigrays in Ethiopia. I mean, wherever you find terrorists, you will find USAID. What Chris Murphy is talking about. The funny one was firewood for the Ukrainians on the front line, who are basically getting massacred in one of the worst war of attritions ever. And they're cheering like this is some great achievement. So, so firewood here for Zelenskyy. He's saying thank you very much to USAID and Donald Trump for the firewood, and it's going to be a warm winter in Ukraine. So this is kind of what they get up to. I find it to be comical, to say the least. But what you were talking about before, let's just understand what we're dealing with here, and this is where it gets interesting. This organization is an instrument of smart power. Like soft power is media influence internationally, smart power is NGO influence. And so this is a really important part of the U.S. empire. So while they have to be careful if they want to keep their empire, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I'm happy to see USAID being dismantled. I've been exposing it for over a decade through my work on interviews, podcasts, and so forth. I've even written a paper and done academic papers on it as well. So it's like, I'm happy to see this, but I don't think the Trump administration, these people realize the depth of how far the influence spreads. I mean, this is a funded network whose tentacles reach into every single country around the world. I saw this firsthand in the Middle East, where they would use USAID to divide and rule. So they'll fund the Christians in Lebanon, but not the Shiites, to create animosity between sectarian division in Lebanon. So they'll do English language courses in wealthy Christian areas, but they won't fund anything in some of the Muslim areas.
Right.
So those Christians will be more pro-U.S. They'll be much more on board with whatever the U.S. embassy is saying regarding Syria and Lebanon and so forth. So this is how it works in Afghanistan, in Africa, and they can switch it on and off depending on who's in power. There's a fifth column that USAID has funded in every country, and all they have to do is flick the switch depending on who comes into power. If it's a populist they don't like, flick the switch. You can get people on the street against Vucic, marching in Serbia, as you can see, or start whispering campaigns like Vucic is selling out Serbia to NATO or something like that. And these people are all on the payroll, basically, of USAID. So they don't realize, a lot of people in the Trump administration, Rubio knows how what a valuable tool it is here. But let's just take a look. So 10 years ago, roughly, or 2016, Smart Power, this is an article that we published. I think you did a previous version of this up at UK Column. And here is where we expose the white helmets. So among all these different, you've got the National Democratic Institute, you've got the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. That's international. The Middle East Partnership Initiative, the Millennium Challenge Corporation. You've seen that in the UK as well, and across Europe. And these things are tied into, the WEF and Soros Open Society. But USAID is the Swiss Army knife of NGOs. And the latter's reputation here as a facade for U.S. covert operations is well documented by now, and is currently, it's the U.S.'s #1 funding vehicle for the controversial white helmets in Syria. Tens of millions of dollars were funneled to the white helmets through USAID. And right now, with all the exposures Elon Musk is talking about, Marco Rubio, Trump, nobody is mentioning how much money the white helmets received from the United States government via USAID, because both parties do not want to own that. So they're being very selective. They're talking about DEI, trans theater productions in Ireland. All of that stuff makes headlines of the kind of anti-woke stuff, but the really hardcore funding of terrorist organizations. The White Helmets, let's not kid ourselves, members of the White Helmets are proven to be also fighters with al-Nusra. There's photographic evidence. We published reams of it over the years. So effectively, they're subsidizing terrorism in Syria for years, the United States government. And so is there going to be any accountability for that? Is Elon Musk going to pull any of that up? Is he going to send his savants in to show us where the White Helmets money is going? And the contractors under USAID, like Chemonics in Washington, D.C., they're directly involved with all of these groups in Syria, all of them.
Yeah.
That's not going to get exposed. I haven't seen it exposed yet, so we'll do our best to expose it and put pressure on those people to maybe release some of that information, because I think it's highly relevant.
So as we've said, the NGO sector going nuts, and not just them, as we'll see. Here's the Telegraph here, for example. BBC's Media Action Charity received US aid funding, and so they are commenting on in fact, the US administration was commenting, for example, on disinformation operations in Kazakhstan. This Telegraph article here, well, I'm glad they finally caught up. As usual, the mainstream media does catch up with, at some point with what the UK column's done, because, of course, we published this in 2014, this information. It should come as no surprise to anybody that BBC Media Action is funded, amongst others, by the US State Department and also the USAID. Now, this is the graph as it was, or the breakdown of their funding in 2014. That has continued on since then. But this article, as I say, written by Brian Gerish, the article was not just covering Kazakhstan, but also Kenya, Syria, Ukraine, all places that BBC Media Action were active. And this is about media development. In other words, helping build a media and influence operations in countries that might not otherwise have a pro-British or pro-Western editorial policy. Now, Elon got in on the act. So here he is saying the BBC is literally state-funded.
No kidding.
Not quite accurate, but nonetheless, BBC Media felt the need to respond, and they said a free press is essential to freedom and democracy. Well, hold on a second. What you're doing is media development. So, of course, it is essential for the pursuit of, inverted commas, freedom and democracy in the sense that you mean it, that you are given the money to pursue these efforts in these countries. And they said 75% of countries around the world do not have a free press. Britain does not have a free press, we should note, for various reasons. BBC Media Action, they say, supports local media around the world to deliver trusted information to people most in need. And by trusted information, they mean information that is trusted by Western intelligence agencies and Western elites.
Exactly.
Right. But as I said, it doesn't end with NGOs and charities. The direct funding of mainstream media organizations through subscriptions is also coming under the magnifying glass. So here's Politico, case in point. $8 million is the number that's doing the rounds at the moment. However, according to US regime funding records, only $44,000 of that came from US aid during 2023 and 2024, that financial year, with the remaining sum coming from other federal agencies. So that's okay then, isn't it?
That's not state-funded media.
Well, precisely. So it looks like more money was also spent on Politico Pro, which is Politico's intelligence platform. And then the question has to be asked, does the US regime not have an intelligence capability of its own that it needs to be spending money? So this doesn't look like people getting subscriptions. This looks like a bung. This looks like a subsidy.
What Politico Pro was basically a dashboard of talking points for other mainstream media, people in government, people in federal departments, that everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet.
Right.
So it's kind of like doing it out in public. That's one of the geniuses, Mike, of USAID. It was just out in the open. There's a lot of merits to that. It was hiding in plain sight. The problem is too many other countries have figured out the game and they've started kicking them out, like Hungary,
right,
Egypt, Russia, and basically the list goes on. So there's fewer and fewer countries that will be able to, that USAID can operate on with these influence operations. I was in Hungary, Mike, only before the new year, and they had to, it was so bad in Hungary, they had to open an Office of Sovereignty Protection to basically battle the likes of USAID and these NGOs that were trying to create fifth columns to overthrow Viktor Orban, basically, because he was getting too popular and his agenda was getting too popular. So they literally had to create a government department just to share information with the public about what all these NGOs like George Soros, Open Society, and everybody's up to. I mean, literally Western governments trying to topple NATO member states. Yes. I mean, that's what was happening. It's just ridiculous.
Right. And money, by the way, was also being spent on the New York Times and the Washington Post. So what about Politico's response? Well, CNN has it here with this classic headline. White House says it will cancel $8 million in Politico subscriptions after a false right-wing conspiracy theory spreads. So, so
they're admitting it.
They're admitting $8 million, but it was a conspiracy theory. But anyway, the response from Politico themselves is that Politico has never been a beneficiary of government programs or subsidies, not 1 cent ever in 18 years. No, they just bought subscriptions instead to the tune of $8 million, and that makes it up. But anyway, we gotta end that there. We will talk more about this in extra, I'm sure. In the meantime, if you like what the UK Column does, please go to support.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. You can join as a member. You can make a donation. You can pick something up from the shop, or via clive2carl.com. We get a small commission for anything you buy there. But please do share anything you see on the UK Column website on the various platforms. Now, another reminder of Saturday, the 5th of April, 2025, UK Column on location is going to be in Cheltenham. We will be announcing speakers for that very, very soon, and tickets will be on sale on Monday. So keep that date for your diary. And also, if you didn't see Charles's interview with Sir Julian Rose yesterday on the resistance to faceless modernity in farming and so on, do have a look on the UK Column website for that. The Public Child Protection Wales annual conference is on the 22nd of February this year. Some fantastic speakers on that. Do support Kim Isherwood in this effort if you possibly can. And also, finally, on this, the Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry that is also taking part in on the 22nd of February 2025 in Edinburgh. If you are in that part of the world, you can support that event as well. Okay, let's come on to you, Mark, and National Media Literacy Week.
Yes, the National News Literacy Week is being sponsored by the News Literacy Project, and the EW Scripps Company. We'll focus on this slide a little bit. Is the main longtime U.S.-based news company that's behind this, along with that other News Literacy Project, that organization. It just concluded today, February 7th. It's been going since February 3rd. This is the 6th annual, presented by the Literacy Project, the EW Scripps Company, and USA Today. It provides educators with resources to weed out misinfo and disinfo. And the DC-based nonprofit News Literacy Project, which started in 2008, is funded. And at first, I didn't see this. I thought at first maybe this looked a little more innocent or a little more on the level, but I did a little bit of digging, and that literacy project is funded by, among others, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Henry Luce Foundation, which is Time Life, News Corp, which is Murdoch, Hearst Foundations, New York Times, Bloomberg Philanthropies, that needs no explanation, the Crown Family Philanthropies, which, among other things, is the defense industry, the Ann B. and Thomas L. Friedman Family Foundation, that's the longtime columnist for the New York Times, Tom Friedman, and dozens of others. So right away, it got sort of a different smell to it as I looked into it. Now, here's a short promo video from the News Literacy Project.
Teens are navigating the most complex information landscape in history. Social media feeds mix rumors, memes, and influencer marketing in with news, opinion, and entertainment. It's no wonder young people don't know how to separate fact from fiction. News literacy education can help.
Fabricated content is misinformation that is designed to deceive you into thinking that it's real.
Find out how at newsliteracyweek.org.
One thing that strikes me in that video, before we look at the next slide briefly, is that they talk about social media being the sole culprit of the problem, and that it mixes entertainment with news. And the whole thing is very confusing. That is absolutely true, and even more so of television itself. In fact, the Scripps Howard Company, or EW Scripps as it's sometimes called, boasts about the fact that it owns both entertainment and news media assets. And then they attack social media as being a problem for pushing forth those same things, news and entertainment, and confusing things. So therefore, they're really targeting the young people and the population in general with their version of what news really is and what it isn't in this crusade. Now, we'll look at this next slide. Some of the educational elements that are being put before the kids mainly are, for instance, dangerous, offensive, and malicious content could include discriminatory language, unverified pseudoscience. Think about vaccines in that regard. Content that promotes violence or coverage that, as the Society Professional Journalist Code of Ethics states, panders to lurid curiosity. And then lack of balance, consistently focusing on one angle or side of a legitimate debate or controversy while ignoring or distorting other perspectives. Now, that's very ironic that this would be in the News Literacy Project's content for reasons that we'll see in just a moment. Let's move on from there. This is just a little background. The EW Scripps Company, also known as Scripps, is an American broadcasting company. It goes all the way back to 1878. It started as a chain of daily newspapers. is headquartered at the Scripps Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, for the record. It started in the newspaper business, expanded into radio and TV, but it sold off its newspaper holdings in 2014 and exited radio fairly recently in 2018. So it's strictly television now. The Scripps Howard Fund gets into journalism education, this so-called childhood literacy they're talking about. The Scripps Howard Foundation has similar aims. And early Scripps newspaper chain decisions, by the way, they included not using the Associated Press wire service, and Scripps literally created United Press International, claiming Associated Press was just for the plutocrats. In fact, UPI wasn't really much better than AP in the long run. But the reason I mentioned the part in there about they want people to look out for news outlets that focus only on one angle to the exclusion of other angles, that's really ironic because as I did a little bit more digging, I came across the Howard Center, and that's based at Arizona State University. And the Howard Center is made possible by the Scripps Howard Foundation. And they did, their investigative journalism unit did a hit piece on Richard Mack's Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. And when I watched the 9-minute news video that came out of their investigation with Richard Mack, it was absolutely one-sided, that Richard Mack was an irredeemable right-wing conspiracy theorist, that the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association was completely wrong in its assumption that there are limits on federal power. The news broadcast was basically saying there are no real inherent limits on federal power at all. And who are sheriffs to say that there should be such limits? And so there was a lot of hypocrisy there, to say the least. So this is yet another salvo from the mass media cartel guys, where they're trying to tell us what to watch, what not to watch, and saying that there are saviors, that we need only look to them for guidance. But meanwhile, as this next slide shows, isn't it even more ironic that Scripps News is shutting down its 24/7 broadcast channel? That's the TV part that remains, citing financial challenges. And that's the over-the-air broadcast channel. It's terrestrial. And there's a couple of hundred layoffs, et cetera, et cetera. And on the last slide, it kind of drives the point all the way home. This is from an earlier presentation I did on UK Column last fall. Meanwhile, Americans' trust in the media in general remains at a trend low. And in fact, the trust in the media got even lower than Congress. Now imagine what that would require to have less trust than Congress. So this is a good accent piece to USAID basically being another version of BBC Media Action, and them claiming that state-run media is a bad thing, when in fact we're finding out that many media are in fact state-run, even though they claim not to be. So it's just further proof that people need news outlets like UK Column to really create a new news ecosystem that's on the level. And it's good news in a broad sense, because it's just so obvious that they're exposing themselves for the frauds that they are.
Thank you, Mark. Let's come back to the UK. And back in 2018, the National Crime Agency began whining that the use of end-to-end encryption in online chat applications like WhatsApp and Telegram were causing them major limitations on intelligence gathering. And this kind of commentary has been rumbling on since then. So this is June last year, with a declaration from EU police chiefs, including UK police chiefs, also complaining that they can't keep the public safe without the ability to break encryption, end-to-end encryption online. Well, nearly 3 years ago, Apple began rolling out what they called advanced data protection, which provides end-to-end encryption on data stored on Apple's cloud platform, iCloud. The functionality came to the UK finally about a year ago or so. But the UK government has decided that enough is enough. And according to the Washington Post here, they have succeeded in getting a court order demanding that Apple give them access to data on iCloud stored there by British citizens. The issue, the Post says, is that cloud storage is that only the user can and not Apple can unlock the data. And so if there are requests for access to that data, Apple cannot provide it. So the Post reports that rather than break the security promises that Apple has made to its users, that Apple will probably just stop offering encrypted storage in the United Kingdom. In the meantime, though, Ofcom has now, because if we're worried about surveillance, which also is part of the censorship agenda, Ofcom has published its requirements under the Online Safety Act for anyone running an online forum, for example, the UK's community website, or any platform that provides what they call a user-to-user service. And this is going to require anyone running such a platform to act as a government proxy for the censorship regime imposed by the Online Safety Act. And to that end, they've provided a handy tool for those in doubt to decide. And I'll just scrub through here a couple of graphics. Sorry for the delay on this while we get to the relevant thing. But basically, what they're saying is that if you are in doubt about whether they fall under the regime, according to this tool, then this handy tool will help you work that out for yourself. So any organization, and that means commercial or voluntary, so it's not just applying to businesses, this applies to a club or a society that's running an online forum for a special interest group or whatever. And it's a service where people can post comments or post their own content. They will have to comply with this, with these rules. And the rules are that you have to carry out risk assessments for illegal content, which may be posted on your platform, that you have safety duties on illegal content with respect to taking them down and so on. And you've got to maintain significant records for that. So this is going to put an unbearable administrative burden on small organizations. And I think the clear intent there is that those organizations become untenable.
Or managed by an AI service
that
in the
will
future.
Not be sufficient. That won't be sufficient, because what they're talking about here is holding these organizations to account. So, for example, UK Column, I or Brian or somebody could be held responsible for content that's on the community website. We could be facing a jail sentence.
Or mothers against vaccines with children with autism.
Precisely. Yes.
They'll have to be under this regime as well.
Absolutely right. So Ofcom says that this only applies to social media platforms or online discussion forums where users can discuss things with other users. They say it doesn't apply to comment sections and blogs or news articles, for example. But even here, it's vague. So as this Register article is pointing out, they asked Ofcom what happens when someone posts comments to a blog which are unrelated to the content of the blog. It's quite often that something appears that's completely off topic. So say you're writing about the Ukraine war and somebody posts something which is considered illegal content about immigration, for example. Ofcom said, well, content will be exempt if it comprises comments or reviews relating to provider content. The Act makes no mention of how closely connected the provider content to the provider content that the comment must be to benefit from this exemption. So in other words, they're not giving any guidance on this whatsoever. So they are, as I say, now requiring people that are running, could even be people that are just simply bloggers, to become proxies for government censorship.
So you mean even if you have a public comment section?
Yes.
Even though it's public,
yes.
It's not private. It's not user to user. It's public
facing.
No,
it is user to user because it's comments in the sense
but it's public facing.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So it's just part of a conversation around an article, right?
That's
right. How we look at it as normal, sane people who've actually been using the internet for like 30 years,
yes,
right?
Yes.
That's how we look at it.
That's right.
But government doesn't look at it that way, do they? They look at public comments under an article as threatening.
Correct.
And must be policed. So any agent provocateur can come on and sabotage any article, any post. They could even be part of a government intelligence or influence op, like paid for by USAID, as an example.
And the aim here is to make sure that the people producing content which might be viewed as counter-narrative or counter what the government would like to see are so tied up in maintaining a censorship and a moderation regime that they don't have time to write the blooming article in the first place anymore. That is the main point here.
And they wonder why they're losing hearts and minds is because they're too busy doing Orwellian craziness instead of actually formulating policies that work and help people and improve people's day-to-day lives and lower the cost of living. Hello, hello.
Yes.
Hint, hint, hint.
Exactly.
No, we're going to censor you harder. We're going to make you moderate and self-police and do risk assessments on people commenting on blog posts. This is utterly ridiculous.
It is. More and extra. Let's move on. ICC, Patrick.
Okay, well, look, the backlash again. The Trump threatened that. We'll go back. He said, look, if they do an arrest warrant on Bibi Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant for war crimes, we're going to come after the International Criminal Court. We're going to sanction the ICC. So don't do it. And of course, Karim Khan, they did indict Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and the United States have announced this week that they're sanctioning the ICC, and individuals will be sanctioned as well. So what are they talking about? Bank accounts, debanking people? We're not sure. So there's been a huge backlash to this. And look at Netanyahu sitting there all smug. He's not looking well, by the way. That's another story. But anyway, so this is the coalition for the International Criminal Court. And this is interesting. So this is basically a coalition of people opposing these sanctions. Now, this is significant. This is not nothing. This is a lot of different groups here, and we'll scroll down and take a look at this. But this includes tons of international civil society organizations. We're talking about 140 different groups here that comprise this coalition of people to support the ICC. And this includes, Mike, a lot of allies of the United States, okay, and Britain and NATO, including people in NATO countries. So again, we talked about the dismantling of the USAID and what a great tool that is for managing deep state operations, intelligence agency subterfuge globally, getting people on side like Sweden and NATO, Finland and NATO membership. That was all done through these civil society organizations here. And just look at the amount of signatories that we'll scroll down and take a look at. But this is not insignificant. The risk here is the United States are now losing, but by sanctioning your allies. This is a symptom of late-stage empire. By sanctioning your enemies and your allies, then you start to lose influence on these networks. It has huge ramifications anyway, but you can go and check that out. We've got that up actually at 21stcenturywire.com here. And so the biggest scathing rebuke has come from Amnesty International. And again, this is highly interesting if we actually take a close look at it here. And this is a statement made by their sort of Secretary General. And she's saying this reckless action sends a message that Israel is above the law and universal principles of international justice. And it suggests that the President Trump endorses the Israeli government's crime and is embracing impunity. This is Agnes Callamard. She's the Secretary General of Amnesty International. But she goes on here, and this is the key bit. The United States is ready to punish an institution, could be any institution, that ensures the individuals most responsible for committing atrocities cannot escape justice. No one responsible for the crimes under international law should be protected or aided in their attempt to escape individual accountability, at least with the assistance of the United States government based on President Trump's political alliances. So what she's talking about here is this relationship between Israel and the United States. Now, she might be a globalist, okay? And so people point out she's spoken at the Davos and World Economic Forum and so forth. But this is important. This is an international network that comprises of U.S. allies, and the U.S. uses Amnesty International to advance its imperial goals. It uses the ICC. The ICC is a tool of U.S. hegemony. And we'll show that to you exactly how they do that. But anyway, she's basically just condemning this attack, and this is going to have a negative impact on the interests of the United States. She kind of explains this here. So this is really significant. By the way, they're using Trump as the hook to raise money now for Amnesty International. So you can see how the influence is kind of going out.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving.
It's incredible. It's literally leaving U.S. hands. They used to have control of this organization. So when I talk about this as a U.S. tool, I'm just going to their cases here. This is the history of the ICC, Mike. And if we just scroll down and take a look, tell me if you notice anything in particular on this. But these are all the basically people that the ICC, at the behest of the United States government, to prosecute for genocide. There's Bashir from Sudan for war crimes, and the list goes on. Now you keep going and going, and you start noticing something here, Mike. Like Do you notice anything about the people?
Yeah, there's no white faces.
They're all African. They're all African, and they're all from countries that have an adversary relationship with the United States government. So although the U.S. is not a signatory of the Rome Statute, they use the ICC as an instrument of soft power, or in this case, hard power. Look, there's Saif Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi's son. He's implicated as well. Again, an enemy of the United States. So the list goes on. There is, however, in the spirit of DEI, Mike, someone did break the color barrier here. This is Joseph Kony. But look at this. Vladimir Putin got indicted back in just not so long ago, over a year ago, and in February 24th, 2024, when the war started with Ukraine, then they began this process to nail Putin. So he is the first white person, technically. Ukrainians won't agree. He'll say he's Slavic. But anyway, he's the first. He's broken the glass ceiling of the color barrier at the ICC. So Putin is a trailblazer in the DEI sense. So this is really important. So this now just think about this. Because of the relationship with Israel, America first they're selling this as America first in America, this attack on the ICC. But you are watching the imperial decline. They're sanctioning their allies as well as their enemies, creating bad relations with their allies. They're paring down the deep state at home and abroad with USAID, the loss of international influence, access to networks, big networks, NGOs, civil society networks. They used to work through those networks to topple governments, okay? Loss of multilateral institution leverage. The UN, the WHO. The WHO is the biggest pharmaceutical sales and marketing organization in the world. And the US does not have any hand in it now because they've defunded it. The UN, the WTO, the ICC, these are all US instruments of imperialism. And this is what the Trump right or the MAGA right haven't fully comprehended, or they have. Maybe they have. But institutions and NGOs are no longer cooperating with the U.S. government as a result of some of these, of their relationship with Israel. So all to protect this special relationship with Israel, the U.S. is losing power and influence internationally. And that's, I think, the main point for people to look at.
And one final point, though, loss of access to markets.
This is huge, Mike. Loss of access to markets. So those markets that the U.S. used these groups to open up, European businesses will enter those markets. If it's all based on cooperation and influence. And so the U.S. is going to have their work cut out for them.
Yeah, indeed. Mark, let's just finish off then with U.S. foreign policy.
We're okay with the time frame?
Yes, good. Let's just do it, Mark. Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. I'll do the abbreviated version, perhaps in the interest of time. One thing that I found was that back in 1987, Donald Trump, a younger Donald Trump, spent the better part of $1 million on a full-page ad in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. And we get a little bit of a taste of the earlier Donald Trump's foreign policy because a president elected for the second time, not consecutively, controversial, interesting things going on. Some of them look good, some of them very questionable. So let's look a little bit more at his past views, right? So if we move on, I distilled what's in the ad and put it on here, and the main parts are in red. And he asks, why are these nations, he's referring mainly to Saudi Arabia and Japan, why are these nations not paying the United States for the human lives and billions of dollars we are losing to protect their interests? Remember, this is 1987. Saudi Arabia, whose very existence is in the hands of the U.S., Trump wrote, refused to allow us to use their minesweepers. The world is laughing at America's politicians as we protect ships we don't own, carrying oil we don't need, destined for allies who won't help. Over the years, the Japanese, unimpeded by the huge costs of defending themselves, as long as the U.S. does it for free, have built a strong and vibrant economy. Let's move on. And I'll hit a little bit more of just the highlights. Basically, he's saying, make Japan, Saudi Arabia, and others pay for the protection we extend as allies. And he wants to help U.S. farmers, he says back then, sick people, homeless, and so on. tax these wealthy nations, not America, end our huge deficits, not a bad thing, reduce our taxes, who wouldn't want that, and let America's economy grow unencumbered by the cost of defending those who can easily afford to pay us for the defense of their freedom. Now, a lot of that sounds good to most people, but what he's basically saying is, okay, if he wants to enact the Monroe Doctrine again and focus mostly on the Western Hemisphere, as the think tanks are saying, and he doesn't want as much meddling and foreign entanglements, you're not really getting rid of foreign entanglements if you're asking to get paid to protect these nations. So he's not saying Japan should pay for its own defense, Saudi Arabia should pay for its own defense and carry that out themselves. Even back then, he was saying, as long as we get paid, we can continue to be entangled with these countries and defend them. So it's simply a transactional thing. Pay us some money and we'll defend you. Again, George Washington would have said these countries should defend their own and pay for it themselves. So it's not exactly the founder's view there. It's a different species of foreign policy. People can make of it what they will. And the think tanks, this is from Foreign Affairs, of course, the August Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, The Price of Trump's Power Politics. They're saying that if Trump retreats to the Western Hemisphere under a Monroe Doctrine-ish kind of thing, that China and Russia will become more emboldened. And of course, that could include China making stronger moves toward Taiwan, perhaps. That's kind of my addition to what they had to say there. And then you'll notice the finality of what the think tanks are saying here. And in this quote, Ivo Dalder is president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and James Lindsay is a CFR fellow. They wrote an article together very recently in Foreign Affairs, 30 January. They're saying literally under Trump, Pax Americana is gone. You'll notice the finality. Born with a Japanese attack on the Pearl Harbor in 41, the U.S.-led international rules-based order, they're saying, has literally died with the second inauguration of Donald Trump. And the post-global order, the post-war global order, is not just obsolete. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. The post-war global order is not just obsolete. Secretary of State Rubio declared in his Senate confirmation hearing, it is now a weapon being used against us. So the think tanks don't think too well of Trump. They see a lot of disruption to their agenda. And this last item just mentions Rubio's first trip as Secretary of State officially was to the Panama Canal. And sure enough, they're wheeling and dealing there. And he's basically saying that the cooperation with China by the Panamanian officials and the Panama Canal management, if they don't change that relationship with China, China reportedly controlling both of the main ports, then the U.S. will throw its weight around a little bit more and basically call the Panama Canal Treaty null and void, and the U.S. would move in to control the ports and probably the overall canal that it did build. So they are following through on the Panama Canal. I don't think they'll use military force. They're trying to use as much diplomatic leverage as they can. And I think that's sufficient for now, Mike, on how the think tank world sees Trump. Again, not too favorably. They're trying to sort it out. But Trump turns out to be an enigma in many ways. But his foreign policy makes some sense, but there's still a lot to sort out. And the think tanks are kind of in a tailspin right now, seeing their global world order under siege as they see it.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you for that. We'll have to leave further conversation on that till extra, but I'll just make the point, of course, that Panama has said that they are withdrawing from the Belt and Road, so that's making some moves towards appeasement of Trump's position on this. But we'll talk about more about that in extra in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much to Patrick and Mark for joining us today, and everybody that's been watching. Thanks for all the support, and stick with us if you're a UK column member for extra. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. on Monday as usual. See you then. Bye-bye.